It was early morning when the faint scent of coffee began mingling with the sweet aroma of pastries at the Cat's Cradle Café. Dawn light filtered through wide windows, illuminating the pastel walls, the cozy armchairs, and of course, the main attraction, a dozen cats that roamed freely or lounged in sun-soaked spots. The cafe was a gem in the heart of Mulberry Marsh, a quiet town known for its scenic boardwalk along the water and its friendly residents who adored the cafe's feline inhabitants as much as piping hot cappuccinos. Mindy Garner, a part-time volunteer at the Cat's Cradle, hummed under her breath as she filled a saucer with catnip treats for Clover, a tabby who always licked Mindy's hands in gratitude. The cats adored her gentle nature, and she cherished her afternoons spent helping tidy up, catering to the cafe's guests, both human and feline, and chatting with the cafe's owner, a jovial woman named Harriet. Mindy had moved from the city a year ago, seeking the simplicity of small-town life. She had quickly found her place here, among the plush cat beds and frothy lattes. Mornings began quietly, usually accompanied by Harriet's cappuccino machine steaming up the glass display case full of scones and cookies. But today, Mindy noticed tiny details felt off. For one thing, Mr. Twinkle's a ragdoll cat that strayed from one tall cat tree to the next was wearing a new collar, a shiny thing with a thick band of faux gems. Mindy gently coaxed Mr. Twinkle's over to her. The cat meowed in protest, but eventually indulged her curiosity. She turned the collar in her hands and saw that on the underside was an engraved string of numbers. She squinted. 983, 21, 3708. It read, followed by a strange set of letters. She had never seen anything like it on a pet collar. Throughout the morning, Mindy kept an eye on the rest of the cats. To her surprise, 3 more had brand new collars with similarly peculiar code sequences. She couldn't pinpoint how or why the cats had ended up with these, or who had put them on. Surely Harriet would have mentioned new accessories or a donation if it was something official. But Harriet hadn't said a word, and she was rarely out of the loop about cat matters. When the cafe slowed down mid-afternoon, Mindy found Harriet wiping down tables and asked her straightforwardly, "Did you happen to buy new collars for some of the cats? They look a bit fancy." Harriet frowned and shook her head. "New collars? Nope, not me." With another confused glance, she added, "We only switched out a few older collars last month, and that was just standard stuff, nothing with jewels or codes." Mindy retrieved Mr. Twinkle's collar, showing Harriet the engraved numbers. Harriet traced them with her fingertip, her brow furrowing. "Odd," she murmured. "I've never seen these before. Where could they have come from?" Later that day, when Harriet locked the door after the last customer said their goodbyes, Mindy approached the cat tree with a gentle shuffle. She didn't want to startle the cats. She collected the 3 other fancy collars. Mindy's heart quickened at the idea of a secret code etched into cat collars. True, she was no detective, but she had a persistent curiosity she couldn't easily dismiss. Quietly, she wrapped them in a soft cloth. A cafe's light started clicking off around them, each switch leaving them in deeper twilight. Harriet offered to stay, but Mindy insisted it was no trouble to look into the collars herself. Over a mug of tea in the small office at the back, Mindy opened her phone to see if these numbers and letters matched anything obvious. Phone numbers, references to a book, maybe even coordinates. She had no luck, but it didn't dissuade her. If nothing else, Mindy told herself, she could bring them to the local library, a stately old building near Mulberry Marsh's central square, and consult Miss Kendall, an elderly librarian rumoured to know a bit of everything. The next morning, Mindy arrived at the library just as it opened. She navigated the labyrinth of tall shelves until she reached Miss Kendall's desk. The librarian wore half-moon spectacles that perched on the tip of her nose, and her voice was gentle as she said, "Mindy, what brings you in so early?" Mindy explained about the mysterious collars, their coded numbers and the partial letters. Miss Kendall peered at the inscriptions, eyes flickering with interest. Well, these might be some sort of book cipher, she suggested, or it could be referencing an artifact catalog number. My father worked in antiques, and sometimes codes like these indicated item categories. They moved to a reading table where Miss Kendall spread out the collars in a neat row. The soft morning light made the inscriptions clearer. One collar read 150 5470 119 LB. Another read 438 5122 10X. Miss Kendall rummaged in a reference section for old tomes about cryptography, ciphers, and local antiques. Now and then, she jotted down notes on a notepad. For an hour, they made little headway deciphering the strings. Suddenly, Miss Kendall looked up, as if struck by a memory. Years ago, a traveling exhibit of rare artifacts came to Mulberry Marsh. I recall some items from the Marsh Historical Society ended up being stolen. They say a ring of criminals snatched them and sold them on the black market. It was the talk of the town for a while, but nobody was ever caught. She tapped the collar gently. Perhaps these codes refer to artifacts from that time. Mindy's eyes widened. So you think these might be connected to a black market ring? It's just a theory. But this suggests you might want to talk to the Marsh Historical Society. Their records could show if these codes match old artifact tags. That afternoon, Mindy left the library and headed straight for the Society's small archival office. The archivist on duty, a dedicated researcher named Glenn, took one look at the strange inscriptions and assured Mindy he'd rummaged through the old inventory list. She lingered on a creaky wooden chair, biting her lip as Glenn flipped pages in thick binders. Eventually, he pointed at a reference in a ledger, line item number 438, 512210, antique silver compass discovered near Marsh Creek, stolen in 2003. He glanced over the collar again. Sure enough. That's a match. And look, that second set of letters. Aw. They could be an internal code for the artifact's location in the museum or in storage. Maybe the same system the thieves used? Heart thudding, Mindy gazed at the small row of notes in the ledger. So, if I can figure out the meaning of the letters, I might know who currently has the compass, or where it's being sold? Glenn nodded slowly and ran his fingertip down the page to see if any footnotes were attached. It's quite possible. But these are old references. The thieves might have changed their codes over the years. A troubled look flickered across his face. Would you like me to try cross-referencing the other codes? Yes, please, Mindy said. This might be bigger than just some random cats with odd collars. And indeed, Glenn discovered matches for each of the collars Mindy brought. A pearl-handled dagger stolen in 2005, a gold pendant gone missing in 2007, and a miniature cameo brooch from 2010. Each artifact's code lined up with one of the collar engravings. Back at the café that afternoon, Mindy told Harriet everything she'd learned. Harriet seemed both alarmed and fascinated. The cat's cradle, a place full of warmth and purring cats, was the last spot one would expect to find evidence of a black market ring. Harriet reminded Mindy that a small handful of cat owners always popped in, letting their cats roam while they sipped tea. Could one of these regulars be involved? Did they swap collars in the café, using the cats as unwitting couriers? Harriet retained a calm air, despite the gravity of it all. We can't jump to conclusions without more evidence, she said, handing Mindy a fresh pot of chamomile tea to soothe her nerves. But we should keep our eyes open. Over the next few days, Mindy started making small notes on who visited the cafe. She knew most of the regulars, like Beth, the florist who doted on her Persian, Neil, a retired teacher who brought in the scraggliest stray cats for some treats, and Meredith, a local artist with a ginger cat that sat on her lap while she sketched. It was easy to notice that the cafe often attracted new faces, but in a small town, strangers stood out. Mindy spotted one man in particular who sat at a corner table, never ordering more than a single espresso. He wore dark, inconspicuous clothes, had a faint scar across his temple, and seemed to stare more at the cats than at his phone or any newspaper. Something about him put her on alert. One afternoon, Mindy gently brushed a feisty kitten named Latte and covertly watched the stranger as best she could. He would occasionally discreetly scratch the chin of a long-haired cat near him. Then, once the cat moved on, he'd pull a collar out of his jacket pocket. But before Mindy could see exactly what he was doing, Harriet appeared with a tray of fresh muffins, unintentionally blocking her view. By the time Harriet moved away, the man had slipped the collar back into place on the cat. Moments later, he paid for his espresso and left, silent as a ghost. Mindy's pulse quickened. That had to be how the cats ended up with these bizarre accessories. She hurried over to the cat in question, a black cat with a distinctive white patch shaped like a crescent moon. Sure enough, a new collar now graced its neck. Carefully, Mindy slid her finger under the clasp, reading the inscription, 291 67 42 11. Then came the letters, FR. She hid her alarm, scratched the cat's ears to keep it calm, and left the collar on for the moment. She didn't want to give away suspicion if the man was watching from a distance. That night, Harriet secured the café a little earlier than usual. Alone in the break room, Mindy carefully removed the new collar and added it to the small stack they were accumulating. She debated going to the local police directly, but she also felt strongly about unraveling the puzzle enough to give them tangible leads. Harriet handed Mindy a bag of cat treats for the road. "Please be careful," Harriet said. "We don't want you confronting people alone." The following morning, Mindy returned to the archives, collar in hand, to see if Glenn could match the new code. Within minutes, Glenn confirmed. 291 67 42 11 is a missing silver hand mirror, last known to be part of a private estate in Mulberry Marsh, stolen about 5 years ago. The letters F.R. might mean final receiver. I've seen it used in some black market circles to mean the intended buyer or the last step before an artifact leaves the area. That revelation made Mindy's stomach turn. The quiet man in the cafe was apparently funneling coded information for final deals. Working as a simple volunteer, Mindy had unwittingly uncovered a criminal ring that had been operating for who knew how long. She thanked Glenn profusely and left, pulling her jacket tighter around her as the wind picked up outside. When she returned to the cat's cradle, Harriet ushered her into the office and shut the door. "I just got a call from Detective Marianne Alvarez," Harriet said, clearly shaken. She'd heard rumors of suspicious activity around town. People receiving cryptic notes, shady transactions. "I told her we might have information. She's on her way over." Detective Alvarez arrived not long afterward, a woman with kind, focus-filled eyes. She listened intently while Mindy recounted everything. The coded collars, the cafe's mysterious visitor, Glenn's research, the stolen artifact references. The detective scribbled notes with a practiced efficiency. Finally, she said, "We've been looking for signs of this ring's operation for months, but they've been careful. If they're using animals as couriers, that explains how they've eluded us." The detective accepted the collars as evidence and set up a meeting in 2 days, telling Mindy and Harriet to keep the man in the cafe under observation if he returned. "Try not to alarm him," she warned. "We want enough evidence to catch the entire network, not just one messenger." For the rest of that day and the one following, Mindy went about her usual cafe tasks, serving cat-shaped cookies, wiping cats, rushing the cats. Yet she felt hyper-aware. Every time the doorbell tinkled, she glanced up, waiting for the collar-swapping stranger to appear. The ring of criminals might be monstrous, but the cat's cradle was her safe haven. She disliked the idea that thieves were exploiting it for their shady dealings. Finally, on a rainy late afternoon, the door opened, and there he was again. The man kept his hood pulled low, water dripping from the edges. Carefully, he shook off the raindrops and made his way to the usual corner table. Only one other customer lingered, a teenager sipping hot chocolate, oblivious to the tension. Mindy forced her expression into one of polite cheer, offering the men a menu. He barely glanced at it. "Just an espresso," he said, voice low. Before she turned to go, he fixed her with a sharp glance. "That cat with the white crescent mark still here?" Mindy mentally fought off a spike of alarm. "Yes," she said casually. "She's napping by the window. She's a sweetheart." She walked off to prepare the espresso, hands trembling as she measured out the coffee grounds. While the machine hissed, Mindy looked to Harriet. Harriet nodded, understanding. She discreetly made a quick phone call to Detective Alvarez, informing her that their mystery man had reappeared. Harriet's voice was low, so as not to alert the suspect. After finishing the short call, Harriet placed the phone in her apron pocket and resumed normal work. Carrying the espresso on a small tray, Mindy approached the table. The man accepted it without a word and took a slow sip. She busied herself nearby, tidying cat toys and straightening cushions, using each moment to observe whether he removed a collar from his jacket again. Sure enough, after a minute he pulled a small item, another collar. Leaning over, he extended a hand to the black cat with the white crescent. She approached, tail high, trusting as always. As his hand neared the cat's neck, Mindy suppressed the urge to intervene. She waited until he clipped on the collar and withdrew his hand, leaning back to drink his espresso again. The cat padded off to an upholstered chair. Only then did Mindy approach that corner of the café, wiping tables as an excuse. Her mind whirled, trying to decide if she should remove the collar now or wait for Detective Alvarez's arrival. If she removed it too soon, the man might panic or flee, but if she didn't, she risked losing the evidence. The door chimed again. 2 uniformed officers, accompanied by Detective Alvarez, stepped inside. Detective Alvarez's voice rang out with authority. "Sir, I need to speak with you." The man stiffened. He slammed down the remainder of his espresso as if preparing to bolt. Harriet deftly positioned herself in front of the door. The man eyed the angle, realized his exit was blocked, and turned back to the detective. In a calm but firm tone, Detective Alvarez said, "We have reason to believe you're in possession of illegal property connected to stolen artifacts." The man's eyes darted around, searching for a path. The cat with the new collar jumped onto a table, meowing curiously. 2 uniformed officers stepped forward, ready to restrain him if necessary. Before anyone could blink, he reached inside his hooded jacket, perhaps for something far more sinister than a collar. The officers reacted instantly, disarming him. It turned out to be a folded piece of paper, but that quick motion nearly escalated the entire moment. Detective Alvarez took the paper, and the man was swiftly put in handcuffs. Mindy watched, heart hammering in her chest. It was the tensest moment the Catskadle had ever seen. After calming the man enough to speak, Detective Alvarez retrieved the new collar from the black cat and gave it to an officer. She asked quietly, "Who are you working for?" The man glowered, refusing to speak for a moment. Then, in a voice taut with anger, he muttered, "You'll never catch them all. You've no idea how extensive the ring is. They've been at this for years." Detective Alvarez didn't lose her composure. She simply turned to Harriet and Mindy, nodding. "We'll see about that." She led the apprehended man outside, with the officers following. Police lights flashed through the windows as they read the man his rights, and the drizzle of rain became a steady pour. Mindy and Harriet stood at the threshold, speechless. The cat's cradle now returned to stillness, with only the hum of the light fixtures filling the hush. A few days later, the morning was sunny again, and the café bustled with a hint of its usual cheerfulness. Detective Alvarez arrived, this time in plain clothes, looking more relaxed. She accepted Harriet's offer of a latte and perched on a stool, addressing Mindy with a soft smile. "We've arrested the messenger, and from the clues in his possession, we believe we can locate several stolen artifacts in a storage unit on the outskirts of Mulberry Marsh. We also plan to use the data from the collars as further evidence. If we can crack their codes fully, we can trace precisely where the other items might be. The man hasn't revealed his bosses yet, but it's only a matter of time. Mindy felt a strange mix of relief and pride. I hope it's enough to shut them down for good. We're confident it will be. And you both played a big part. Detective Alvarez sipped her latte, eyes flicking around the cafe, now busy with regular customers who had no idea about the drama that had unfolded days earlier. I can't thank you enough for staying calm and gathering the evidence. Harriet just shook her head, lips quirking into a smile. Never in my wildest dreams did I think cat collars would unravel a black market ring. It's unfortunate they used the calf's beloved cats, Mindy added, petting Mr. Twinkles, who had jumped into her lap. But I'm glad we noticed it in time. Over the following weeks, news spread around town about how the Cat's Cradle volunteers had aided the local police force in cracking part of the artifact theft operation. The ring itself was large, with connections in neighboring counties, but the infiltration of the cafe turned out to be the criminals' undoing. It gave the authorities the critical clue they needed to swoop in on the operation's final deals. Meanwhile, Harriet took extra steps to make sure no collars could be mysteriously swapped on the cafe's feline resident. Each cat was microchipped, and Harriet kept a close watch on customers, politely explaining she had to ensure all cats stayed safe with their assigned accessories only. Her earnest approach reassured frequent visitors, who applauded her vigilance. In a town like Mulberry Marsh, folks prided themselves on community spirit, and no one minded the new security measures if it meant the cats and their cafe home remained well protected. Mindy, for her part, found herself the subject of local gossip. She was both uncomfortable and a little pleased when people whispered her name in the grocery store or while strolling by the wetlands. "That's her," they said. "She's the one who cracked the cat collar code." She'd nod politely, cheeks heating, and wish them a good day. It took time to adjust to the notion that her small act of curiosity had snowballed into a case that might finally resolve years of stolen artifact. More than once, she considered how far-reaching a small mystery in Mulberry Marsh could become. Some mornings, while serving coffee, Mindy remembered the frightening moment the man nearly dashed for the door and Harriet blocked his path. Though Harriet always joked about wanting to be more active, she never thought she'd be aiding in an arrest. "I'll be telling this story to my grandchildren someday," Harriet often quipped with a hearty laugh. It wasn't long before Glenn from the archive stopped by, wearing a grin that brightened his usually serious face. "The recovery recovered the silver compass, the cameo brooch, and some other stolen pieces," he announced, leaning on the front counter. The cafe was relatively quiet at this hour, so Mindy and Harriet listened intently. It seems the ring had stashed them in an abandoned barn. They found all sorts of items, not just from Mulberry Marsh, but from other towns too. Harriet let out a low whistle. "I'm grateful they're returning them to their rightful owners," she said. "Thank you for following the lead so meticulously, Glenn." Glenn shook his head, a touch bashful. "I was just doing my duty. You and Mindy did the real work, noticing those collars in the first place." As Glenn left with a takeaway tea, Harriet exchanged a satisfied smile with Mindy. They both glanced around the cafe, home to so many cats who ambled about without a care in the world now. Clover, Latte, Mr. Twinkles, and the black cat with the crescent mark remained oblivious to the fact that they had been unwitting accomplices in a smuggling scheme. At a table near the window, the black cat was curled up in a patch of sunlight, collar-free and content. Later that afternoon, after the string of lunch customers, Mindy took a moment to breathe and sip her own cup of Earl Grey. She had never come to Mulberry Marsh expecting to unravel mysteries. Volunteering at the cat cafe was supposed to be a quiet refuge after the hustle of city life. Yet, she had ended up right in the middle of something bigger than she'd ever imagined. It brought a new perspective. Even in idyllic small towns, cunning plots might lurk. but it also emphasized the goodness of a close-knit community, ready to step up and protect what they loved. Detective Alvarez dropped by again, this time to verify a few last notes. "The man you helped apprehend has decided to talk, albeit begrudgingly," she said as the espresso machine gurgled. "He's naming accomplices. We've already got leads that might span outside of Mulberry Marsh." The detective's eyes twinkled with gratitude, diligence, and observation. That's what solved this case. And a bit of luck. That the criminals underestimating a cat café would never suspect anyone might piece together those engravings. They must have thought no one paid attention to the cat's collars. Mindy shrugged. I guess their plan was almost brilliant, but not quite. With a laugh, the detective agreed, then left, promising to return for a proper latte next time she had a free afternoon. In her wake, the café felt lighter, as if a storm had passed and left only a quiet hush in the air. Mindy glanced out the window. The boardwalk curved around the marsh, lush green vegetation shining in the sun. A few ducks quacked lazily near the water. Life went on, gentle and calm again. It was everything she cherished about Mulberry Marsh. The serenity, the sense of belonging. She gave the cat by her ankles a fond stroke, adjusting its collar to make sure it was the café's standard one. Harmless, unadorned but for the café's name and a contact number. No more cryptic inscriptions or suspicious codes. In the weeks that followed, the cat's cradle refined its volunteer protocols, adding small security checks that made it difficult for anyone but the staff to handle the collars. Mindy stayed busy with her usual duties, feeding felines, greeting customers, and making sure the cappuccino foam had just the right swirl when Harriet was in the weeds. She found a renewed appreciation for life in this cozy corner of the world. One late afternoon, just as Mindy was about to leave, Harriet patted her shoulder. The café was quiet again, tables cleared, cats snoozing on plush cushions. "Wild times, huh?" Harriet said with a wry smile. "And here I thought the most excitement we'd have this year was adopting out that rowdy litter of kittens." Mindy laughed softly, recalling the adorable chaos those kittens had caused. "I don't think I'll ever take ordinary days for granted again," she said. "It's funny, though. A few months ago, my biggest challenge was figuring out how to keep the cats from stealing each other's food. Now I'm glad that's the only challenge left." Outside, lampposts glowed and a soft breeze carried the scent of damp earth. Mindy hefted her tote bag over her shoulder. She gave Harriet a wave and stepped out into the evening. The town streetlights reflected off the slow-moving water of the marsh. Somewhere in the distance, crickets chirped. It was a perfect night. Despite the excitement, or maybe because of it, Mulberry Marsh felt like home more than ever. On her way down the sidewalk, Mindy glanced back at the Cat's Cadle storefront. Through the windows she could see Harriet turning off lights one by one, the cats curling up for the night. A surge of contentment filled her. She'd helped protect something precious. For the cats, for the café, and for the community that embraced both. Tomorrow, everything would be back to normal. Fresh baked goods in the display case, cats vying for cuddles with customers, and Harriet greeting everyone by name. But lingering in the corners of Mindy's mind was the knowledge that she and Harriet, with the help of Detective Alvarez and Glenn, had uncovered something nobody else had even suspected. They'd solved a puzzle because they'd cared enough to notice something unusual on a cat collar, and if another mystery ever crept into those pastel walls, she suspected she would notice that too. After all, sometimes all it took was a keen eye and a willingness to follow the smallest clue, especially in a place as unsuspectingly cozy and surprisingly resourceful as Mulberry Marsh.